Good evening. This is the North Andover Board of Health, October 26, 2017, and I call the meeting to order. First on the agenda is to stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. No public hearings tonight. We're going to skip around. I want to, if that's okay with everybody, we'll do the minutes and we'll do the new business last. We'll start with TEC Environmental. Everybody okay with that? Okay.
Move to approve the minutes.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Joe? Thank you. Got that down. Thanks, Frank. Okay. Well, Tim Jones is here. Tim, do you want to please introduce yourself? And by the way, thank you very much for coming up tonight to give us a presentation on what you and your company and colleagues do in regards to Wheelabrator. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. Tim Jones from TEC Environmental. Also with me tonight, Mark Wallace, also from TEC Environmental. He's our air quality practice leader. Again, thank you for the opportunity. I think we all got to informally meet back on August 31 when you all came out to the Wheelabrator facility, and we sat and talked in great detail with Richard and his team about the operations of the plant. We talked briefly about what we had done in terms of taking on the scope this year of keeping tabs and inspecting the Ash House reconstruction project, in addition to our annual duties to monitor the air compliance activities at Wheelabrator. Following that meeting back in August, Brian had reached out and asked at some point in the future if we could come in and meet on a little bit more formal basis and just generally overview of what our scope, our role is, and certainly welcome any feedback. Obviously, you've seen our annual reports year over year that summarizes in great detail all of the activities that Wheelabrator is required to undertake over the course of the year in terms of monitoring, testing, calibrating their machine, so to speak, and how we receive that information, distill that information, and certainly report and attest to their compliance to the Board of Health every spring. So again, tonight I think we're just here to just review the highlights of what we do, and like I said, welcome any feedback at the end of this in terms of would you like to see us more frequently, when we file our annual report in the spring, would you prefer if we came in and delivered it in person, and those types of things. So again, welcome any feedback, either on the content of those annual reports that we've been filing, or if there's some other regular progress updates that you would prefer that would help shed light in any dark corners that may exist with our work. So before I get going, any sort of questions around that? No? Okay. Again, TEC Environmental, I'm sorry.
Was constructed, correct?
15. We're in our 15th year of monitoring and reporting. Oh, sorry. Oh, you do. You have a teleprompter. So just very briefly, founded in 1984, we're based in Waltham, Mass. We also have an office in Vermont where I spend a good deal of my time. Certainly, just a subset of our resume. We've completed quite a number of air quality, odor, noise, dust projects over our history. Key staff for the Wheelabrator management and engagement. Myself, Tim Jones, I'm the project manager. I assumed this role probably about a year ago. Maybe you've been familiar with my predecessor, Dana Buskey, and certainly Mark Wallace is with me, as well as our air quality team leader. So we are sort of the primary interface. I really act as the primary interface with Gary Collette's team at Wheelabrator, also with Richard Falk, Kevin Burgard, the EHS manager. So those are my prime contacts at the facility. So any work that's done is through that team. And again, like I said, 15 years, this is our 15th year, so when we report in March, it'll be our 15th annual report. So we've got a good grasp of the facility and the operations, and believe that we've been able to effectively manage the relationship and really enjoy an open and transparent relationship with the site management team in terms of just open access to the facility when we are at the facility, certainly highly reactive to any requests or clarifications that we may have over the course of the year. And the same goes, I believe our line is always open for Wheelabrator, and enjoy the open contact we have with them in terms of, you know, when they're preparing to file something, when they're preparing for testing, and just sort of giving us, you know, sort of any sort of advance notice of anything that's going on there, or you're going to see a report on this or something to that effect. So, you know, no surprises, and I think that's a two-way street. Certainly when we're on the site, if we see something or if we note something or need to remark on something, you know, we have a great communication channel with the site team. So again, no surprises. And of course, Brian, I guess is our primary customer, not to leave, you know, last but not least, but Brian's our primary customer, Board of Health, with all that we do. And of course this year, Gene Enright's team in the planning department, we've been communicating with them every week during our ash house inspection. So that was an opportunity that we were glad to take on this year for the ash house reconstruction project.
Tim, other than that, other than the ash house construction, how often is a member of your team on site at Wheelabrator to do checks? I know there's a large annual review, but
At least once a quarter. And then there's some back off-site management of the project as well. DEP site, file review and so forth is sort of another check and balance. But we are at least on site every quarter. And since the middle of July, we've been on site every week. And we expect that cadence to continue through December 31, which is on or about the time that the Wheelabrator is planning to have the ash house project completed on the accelerated schedule that they've been able to come forward with. So it'll be very frequent guests. Just a general scope here again, 10,000 feet site records auditing. Most everything that we do other than the ash house is related to air quality. So that can include, on-site daily operations logs, certainly their staff qualification, licensure, and any incidences that are reported through OSHA. That's something that we also collect and report on. I think, again, it's a great dovetail to understanding what goes on a daily basis there, but also it's a good check and balance that all of their operators are appropriately licensed and certified and so forth. And I think, obviously, it goes a long way into effectively managing and operating the plant and being reactive to anything that may come throughout the course of an operating day. I refer to ourselves as the regulatory reporting receiver. So everything that is sent in on an air quality regulatory basis from Richard and his team comes to copy to us. And also Brian sees most of those filings as well. And in that sense, really what we're doing is auditing what's being sent. And obviously we're going into detail in terms of reviewing all of that material, but again, it's a cadence that we see that something that we sort of pace their progress throughout the year in terms of when we would expect to see certain reports at what times of year. Any sort of reporting for follow-up testing comes on a regular basis. So again, it's we've managed to develop a very predictable cadence of testing, monitoring, compliance, reporting, and sort of that closed loop system. So the routine reporting mostly out to DEP. Obviously the EPA is behind all things air quality related. Some of that reporting is discussing deviations. So it's an imperfect world working with people and machines. So there are deviations that happen throughout the course of the year, and certainly we see the reports on those that address those, explain those, and qualify the conditions that were in play if there are any deviations. Compliance testing oversight, something that we talked about when we met back. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to ask you, now that you're talking about reporting and air quality, if you do get an abnormal reading or deviation that's above standard, how is it handled? You report it, but how would it be corrected at the plant?
Let's,
in general, I'm not
sure. No,
I don't know the specifics.
It's a great question. So something, an upset condition. And Richard, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm too loose with my terms, but something goes amiss with the combustion that causes an exceedance of CO, let's just say. So basically, they're capturing that with their internal controls. That's being flagged internally, and what they do is, their responsibility then is to document the whys and wherefores of that happening, and then putting together that report and sending that report into the regulatory agency with all of the sort of the cause and effect and corrective action. So basically, when we see the report, the occurrence has happened, the reasons why, the exact nature of the excursion, say whatever the limit is, I guess, that's been established in terms of what their emission limit is, what the excursion over that would have been, and then the cause and what the mitigation was for that action. So it's really, I guess you can time log in your system exactly, when those events are happening, and all that information is culled out and put into a report to explain the deviations. And I guess we could qualify that and say, and the deviation may be over what their limit is. Whether I believe, I think we have agreed over the years in the reporting that their limits are more stringent than the actual, regulatory threshold. So saying they deviated over their limit means they're over their limit, but in terms of risk to public health or, severe risk to air quality, typically we find those are well under the regulatory threshold. So
Who set those limits then, individual wheel grader versus general regulatory?
Mass DEP. So it's part of your permitted conditions.
EPA,
EPA, yep.
1984. So it was part of the PSD permitting process. So it was one of the original permits for the facility that was issued back in the early 80s. Okay.
Just introduce yourself.
Hi, sorry. I'm Richard Falk. I'm the air quality manager for Wheelabrator Technologies, and I've been working with the North Andover plant since the late 80s. The plant was permitted in the early 80s by the EPA and the DEP. And at the time that the plant was permitted, there wasn't a lot of nationwide experience with this technology. So the permit limit they came out with was very conservative and subsequently about 30% lower than federal standards that came out with the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990. So it's the most stringent carbon monoxide standard for a municipal waste combustor in the country. So, Tim, his description of the events are accurate. I can qualify it by saying if we have an upset of combustion, it's literally as little as 8 to 10 minutes of an upset. And it's enough to make, be above the standard over the averaging periods that we're given. And other than that, everything Tim described is accurate.
So then you introduced that perhaps there's a deviation or something outside the level that requires a report back to the state. So then is there some kind of a feedback from them or some sort of a corrective action, or do they just serve as a database? And who serves what role then?
The state receives this, they look at it, they have their own internal guidelines for evaluating compliance for a facility, and they have compliance discretion. So if there was something egregious, if there was something that was repeated over a long period of time, then usually it starts with a query, and if it's something that's really significant, they would take an enforcement action.
So it's an after the fact, occurrence of the report. So the event happens, but I think, just echoing what Richard said, is erring on the side of conservatism. The report goes out and it's issued, and that's also something that we look for in terms of patterns of behavior, I guess, just sort of the term of art in terms of in succession, is it happening all the time? Therefore, sort of lending itself to there's some other problem other than just, peaks and valleys that you're going to have, operating a giant, combustor that they manage. So
Well, that would be my next question. The pattern of, say, number of deviations on a set time period. With your companies watching this now over 15 years, could you generally, not looking for specifics, generally tell us that number of deviations has gotten smaller, better, however you want to term it? Or is,
I'll be honest with you, I
given
don't
what
have
they're
that.
operating, are they at a sort of a floor and a ceiling such that it's sort of an allowable, I don't know if that's the right word.
Right. Statistically speaking, to be honest with you, I couldn't say, that there is a floor or a ceiling, but I think it's one of those things where if you're looking at it, the number of occasions and the nature of what's causing the upset, and it seems a lot of it revolves around combustion or some sort of, unplanned outage or something that's an automatic, that's not a normal startup or shutdown conditions and so forth. So there is also data that's generated in there that, is discounted for one reason or another and so forth. So you focus on the event and look at, the number of those events. And I think, what we summarize in our annual report every year is something that we would deem as allowable, based on the cause, the effect, the excursion, the monitoring block. So I think it's, if you're looking at air toxics or criteria type pollutants, again, I don't believe that we could note that we see an issue. And we've had conversations about this too in terms of what if is it an indicator of something? Is it an indicator of worn equipment or something that could be taken care of with training? So we have that dialogue around the deviations as well, just so we know that's normal, it's not normal, or it happens more than once or twice, and the result will be this.
So I'm sorry to keep asking. So then you have a set database for them. I've seen these annual reports, but not in a while. Do you do in sort of determining, well, this is an allowable, do you do a comparison to other facilities of this comparable size, capacity, whatever?
No, I mean, it's something that we could certainly look at if that's something that the board would prefer to see, some sort of side by side, just to get a sense of, is it normal, comparable to that effect. But I would say we're reviewing a report. The compliance, I guess, rests with the agency. So I think we would take the lead of Mass DEP in terms of, is it a compliance issue? Is there some sort of follow-up action that they're going to be tasked with, from the regulatory perspective? So if there is no feedback, obviously we go and we check all the records and make sure that everything, got to the barn, so to speak, that's been filed with DEP, just to make sure that those records are in fact, on the other side and they've been stamped in and checked in and so forth. So again, it's really closing the loop.
Okay.
Just to put this in perspective, in some years, we may have a single deviation, and the deviation is usually an hour, less than an hour in duration. But some cases, occasionally in a year, we'll have a handful. So we're not talking about anything that is a large statistical number. It's when things happen, there are a lot of moving parts, people and machines involved, and every time it does happen, we investigate it and we try to take steps to prevent it from happening again.
Well, that would have been my final, it's not a weekly thing, so this is...
No, not at all, no.
Okay.
Representing the Board of Health, I review the annual reports. I've done that for many, many years, and as some of you know, I was the plant manager there 36 years ago. And for those of you that are watching, basically what this facility is it burns municipal solid waste, and it generates steam and electricity. All the waste in North Andover represents, about 4% of the total capacity of the plant? The plant is very, very large. Not only is it very large, but it's extremely well operated and maintained. The data, the emissions data is very good. There's about 100 plants in the United States, and this is the industry that I'm still very much involved in. I've been to literally all of them, and this plant is extraordinary.
Thank you.
Wheelbarrow has done a very, very good job on that.
Thank you.
As I said, it was 36 years ago. The segue, just a moment, my youngest daughter at that time was 3, maybe 4 years old, and I just came from the hospital. She had a baby 2.5 hours ago.
Congratulations.
And it's amazing. It seems like it was just yesterday that I was there, but time flies.
So overall, when there's a deviation out of the standard, out of the norm, you report it, Richard, it's corrected, and then every day just continues as it normally would be.
Yes, you have an upset, and it's
Correct.
corrected literally within 10 minutes or 20 minutes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just to sort of finish out this slide, compliance testing oversight, which really predominantly is around the stack testing or the emissions testing that they're required to do on a quarterly and every 9-month basis. So there are a couple of phases of emissions testing that they do, and then of course their emissions monitoring equipment, system calibration of that system, as well as part of our oversight responsibilities. And then last but not least, I threw in here special projects. So this year we had the opportunity to take on the Ash House project and fold that into our scope. So we welcomed the ability to do that, and so far it's been a really great project to watch go up, for sure. Come down and then go up. So I know things have changed greatly since you were out there at the end of August, and I have some pictures. There's walls and a roof, and they're stockpiling ash again. So really quite a great fall of weather to be out, especially trying to accelerate yourself through construction on the Northeast. So knock on wood, it keeps going for them. Just an exhibit here, really, and Brian, I can send this to you an email as well, so you can share it around, the fine print here. But really, it's just an example of the weekly report that we've been furnishing to Gene's department and to Brian as well. So the weekly inspections for the Ash House project. So when we were approached with this, it was really under the auspices, I guess, of nuisance conditions. So we wanted to be out there making sure that the ash handling process continued to function as intended, and we weren't having any sort of fugitive emissions around ash handling, live loading of ash. So sort of their mechanism of stockpiling and handling ash, changed rather drastically doing this, but they've been able to effectively contain the ash handling system. And so that was part of our weekly inspection, is to monitor that. And then also just really general erosion control or stormwater, even though there's really not a significant amount of earth disturbance, as you noted out there. But there are some open storm drains around the project, even though it's a closed loop system for Wheeler-Brader. Again, I think we really just tried to implement some just basic best management practices that you'd see around a construction site in terms of covering open stockpiles of erodible materials, soils, and whatnot. Any sort of catch basin protections that we could put in place. And of course, housekeeping is number one in terms of anybody that's spent any time around construction. Is good housekeeping is a good indicator of a good job. So it's one of those again, pattern of behavior. Inspections began July, and as I stated at the opening, they are on pace to be done by December 31. I have no reason to believe at this point that won't happen, but if this good weather continues. But I think they're doing a great job, and I believe that's a very attainable goal for them and their contractors. Said our primary scope really is the air quality from the ash handling. So if you had seen the building beforehand, there was a conveyor belt that extended into the ash house that stockpiled the ash, that made a big stockpile. Trucks would drive in, be loaded with a front end loader, and drive out to their final destination. With this project, they cordoned off a truck bay, built a temporary containment wall that still housed the air scrubber, the wet scrubber for that control the air quality in the fugitive dust in the building. And then the main ash house was completely demolished, all the while switching really from stockpiling to live loading, in which case they basically queued up trucks from their hauling company on site and managed their ash that way by just one truck at a time, either going straight to haul away, or they'd queue up trucks on site when they filled up for the day, and then they'd start the process over again. So the scope for us was to, again, just look at the entire job, make sure the ash handling process was not creating any nuisance conditions, and then again, looking at the housekeeping and just general site upkeep around that as well. Like I said, project's progressing according to the schedule. And to this date, we've had no compliance issues, and I think where we sit today, we can effectively call phase one of the demolition and the rebuild nearly complete. I'd call it complete. The walls are up, the roof is on. When I was there at my inspection today, the ash conveyor has been re-extended into the new ash house, and they were stockpiling ash today, and everything's going according to plan. So the next phase now will be to move the temporary containment wall and then begin the demolition of what has been serving as the truck bay to live load the ash. So that will start in earnest, I believe, next week. And our pictures will begin to show a little bit more demolition. And I believe we can effectively call this complete once all the grouting of the new building is done. Of course, the rain came this week, so I think they have a little bit of work to do. But it's lit. The doors are on. The new roll-up door was installed today and working well. So,
Tim,
yes, sir.
the ash house is almost done. When you fill it up and the trucks haul it out, where do they haul the ash to?
Is it your landfill in Shrewsbury?
The ash is hauled to a monofill that we operate in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts.
Okay, thank you.
Just some pictures here. Just upper left is the temporary containment wall that I spoke of that separated the old primary ash house from the truck bay they created. The conveyor was cut all the way back. You can see the sort of the smaller picture in the middle is the new truck bay that they were able to create, and the truck is essentially parked right underneath the stub of the ash conveyor, so the ash is flowing right into there. The picture on the upper right is the old ash house with all of the cladding stripped off of it, just a shell of its former self, as you'd say. Certainly the lower left, the building's down, and all of that's left was, I guess, what we referred to as the push wall, or the sort of the concrete foundation wall that was completely refurbished and then extended a little bit to prepare for the bottom right, which is the new ash house, the new unistress panel ash house. This picture on the bottom right was a week ago, and the ash house, main ash house, was up in a week's time, and now the roof is on. So just a very impressive feat of engineering, and just amazing to watch these guys work and rig and get this building up. So again, everything's going according to plan, and now today when I came back, the ash house is actually in use. And then the air scrubber they'll begin preparations to move that to the front of the building, essentially in the lower right-hand corner. That picture, the new scrubber will go on a pad that was formed right in front of where the crane is, and it's kind of hard to tell from this picture, but there's a penetration in the wall where the ductwork will go once the scrubber is moved. And I think part of the discussion going into this was also remarking when the scrubber was in use and not in use, and until today, it was in use in the cordoned off truck bay. So there'll probably be a little bit of a period of time when that scrubber will be moved and not in service the entire time. There is some latitude for Wheelabrator to have that out of service. I don't know if discretionary is really the right term for it, Richard, but it's a piece of equipment that I think is really necessary or can be employed on an as-needed basis. So I think primarily I've never seen it not running, but I think there are times there is an allowance to have it out of service as long as they're able to control the environment inside such that there's nothing
The scrubber,
evacuating the building.
that helps control particulates.
Correct.
Okay.
And it controls the environment inside. And obviously, what I was looking for today is anything that was leaving the building, and it was not. So
For those that are listening that may not really have a good understanding of what we're talking about, when he says ash, think of burning wood in your fireplace. What do you end up with? You end up with ash. If you say, put it outside, it's going to blow away, part of it. When the plant was first built, that's what we did. We didn't have an ash building at all, and the ash was blowing all over the place. So this is quite sophisticated, and a lot of major changes, particularly with the air pollution control equipment, has been made over the last 35 years or so. And speaking of air pollution, as noted just a short period of time ago, the limits for the priority pollutants, without going into details, are as strict, if not stricter, in this plant than any other plant in the United States. And again, there's almost 100 of them in the United States. In Massachusetts, the 21H annual emissions test, as mandated by the US EPA, is actually conducted every 9 months. And I believe there's like 7 facilities in Massachusetts, I'm not sure of the exact number. And furthermore, there are quarterly dioxin tests, I believe. From my perspective, a lot of overkill, a lot of testing that isn't warranted, but this is not the time or the place to talk about it right now.
I do want to thank Richard and the crew for having the board up to Wheelabrator for a complete, how it operates, what it looks like. We saw the ash house being built. It was an excellent tour. I learned a lot. I walked in not knowing, I knew some of it, but when I walked out, I was just amazed at how the facility is run and how efficient it is at generating electricity.
Thank you. If any other members of the board would like a tour or a visit, we welcome tours to everybody from scouts to seniors. So we believe the best thing to do is be able to understand what we're doing in your town, and we're more than glad to show off our plant and our operations and our records anytime.
A comment was made earlier in this presentation by Tim that, would we be interested in additional information such as, for example, when the annual reports come out, maybe discuss that with us? Perhaps. I can't say. Certainly if there's a problem, and I would be aware of it,
Sure.
We want you back. But I hope that this is not the last time that you're here. And I hope when you come back, there aren't any problems, as there has not been since the plant's been online.
And I think, again, not to be flip, but I think the no news is good news. And I
Yes.
think that's sort of the philosophy we adopt. We're in close communication. Certainly, we're obligated to let Brian know if we see something that's, out of the norm. So, again, living on that no surprises approach to managing the facility.
Well, I'll tell you on a lighter note with the inspection, and I'm not a tough guy. I'm really, honest to God, I'm not. Ask my wife. I'm not a tough guy. But we took the elevator up to the, what's the top floor? The 7th floor? And I wasn't aware that the floors were steel grates. And I'm not a hero of heights.
There's another word for you, but this is not the time or place to mention it, Larry.
Frank was in front of me, and I just kept saying to myself, just look ahead. A couple times I actually almost grabbed onto Frank because I kept thinking, I'm going down.
Gives you vertigo a little bit,
Right.
right? Looking down.
And that wasn't the top floor.
There was a higher one, too. But we had a great view of the ash house. We didn't go into it, but we had a great view of some of the construction that was explained to us. And I found it fascinating. And there's plenty of controls and systems in place and sensors, like Tim was talking about as far as controls, to alert everybody of everything. So I think they have a good handle on it.
I appreciate that. And I think just one other thing I'll mention here, since we had talked about the scrubber, one of the great retrofits that I noted today is that now that the new ash conveyor is extended in the ash house, is completely clad in, I guess, plastic, for lack of a better term, but so any of the exposed conveyor that will continue to be exposed once that truck bay comes down is completely enclosed, and then it daylights out into the new ash house where it's stockpiling. So again, just a very, very thoughtful approach to keeping that conveyor closed and protected and under control.
Another question, sir, a little different
Yeah,
take on this.
that's what it is.
Your analysis and review and checks are all, as I'm sort of hearing it so far, within the confines of the unit. But local people, when they think about concerns like this, they don't think necessarily about what happens within the facility, but they think about remotely away in neighborhoods, down the street, down whatever. Do you play a role in, do you look at air quality remote from the facility, from Wheelabrator itself?
No. So I think what we're, in our capacity, we're looking at the totality of information that was collected and recorded and tested for over the course of the year. I think, and I have just kind of where you're going right now, I flip to my next slide, it really kind of goes through sort of the discipline or the rigor that we apply to that, and a summary analysis by us in our annual report we'll make a compliance statement in terms of, and I think, you know, the sort of the underlying nature of what we do is there a public health risk? And we're not sitting here saying, you know, we're public health risk assessors, managers to that degree, but I think when you look at the information, the limits that are in place in the plant and where they are to those limits, we hold to the regulatory nature of how the plant is operated and say, you're operating within those bounds, ergo, public health is considered in the conditions under which they operate. So one, you know, if the plant is operated in accordance with the permit and all of their checks and balances prove out, then by extension, we're saying, you know, that the air quality is protected. So we're not doing any remote monitoring, I guess, you know, to your direct question, we do not do any remote monitoring.
So presumption being that somebody else's, probably the research environment looked at when there's a discharge from a certain point, if it's within certain limits as you're required to do within regulatory bounds, that at remote distance from there, it's reasonable and somebody's decided that's safe also.
And it's been modeled, dispersion modeling, so there's a lot of science behind it, and part of what we do, and part of Mark's, you know, specialty at auditing all of the information we bring back is that very thing, is screening, looking at the assumptions. There's another company that has done some work around this in terms of looking at the emission rates. So there are a series of checks and balances that backstop the original assumptions that set the conditions, and so year over year, we're looking at that. Mark, you can expound on that if you want to a little bit.
Sure. Mark Wallace from TEC Environmental. So my background is meteorology. I do a lot of air dispersion modeling for lots of different facilities, and so what my role here is to look at what the dispersion modeling was done by the other consultant, look to make sure that the concentrations are meeting the ambient air quality standards, both for the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for criteria pollutants, which are nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, carbon monoxide, particulate matter, and then the air toxics emission limits as well that are established by the Mass DEP. So again, we look at the dispersion modeling from the standpoint of meteorology, what's been used for that, what's coming out of the stack, and then it does its own, the model itself predicts what the concentrations are at the distances beyond the property line and the surrounding neighborhood.
So you do that in general, but not unique to this site?
No, it is unique to this site. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So it's all basis of design of the facility that, you know, we're pressure testing, you know, those assumptions, if you will, and the concentrations, the emission rates, to make sure that, you know, the modeling is still holding
Right,
true.
so the emissions data that's been collected for that particular year, there's a dispersion modeling that's been done to determine how far that concentration goes, and then whether it's still below the ambient air quality standards or the air toxic limits.
So then, I'm just, since you're here and
Sure.
Answering questions, there were other facilities that came into the air geography that had additional risks that came along with them. And I guess what I was looking at was that since you're not doing remote measurements, we can't really look at this, but in terms of looking at this, now and I'm not making any criticism of Wheelbrader in this, but there are now two facilities relatively nearby, and I don't think you're tasked with any of the compliance of the other nearby facility. So is there, from the air dispersion modeling, how do you look at that in terms of I'm sort of taking leaps ahead here.
Sure.
In terms of risk on an additive basis versus a single source?
So
That's kind of a lot of.
You're concerned about the cumulative
Yes.
effect around the area, is what I think is what you're getting at.
Right.
You know, certainly we're not looking at those other facilities, but from an ambient air quality perspective, at least from the criteria pollutant part of it, the Mass DEP has air monitoring stations at various locations. That data is used to determine what the background is. So those other sources, whether they're roadways or other types of things, are being sampled in that monitoring data. So, in a sense, the monitoring of the background that's in there, when the the emissions from this particular facility are modeled, they are compared to that ambient air quality standard, because that's what's required as determining compliance, is you add that to the background concentration, and then that's compared to the ambient air quality standard. And that's the way we can demonstrate that it's, in compliance, because if that background changes at all, and for over the past 30 years, it's all been going down primarily because of emission controls required by EPA, particularly on transportation vehicles, as well as other emission standards for other types of facilities, power plants, and other sources that are in the area. Emissions, if you look at the Mass DEP monitoring data over the past 30 years, all the results are going down. So, what I'm getting at is that the background's going down. We add the source here. That's as part of that dispersion modeling analysis, and it all shows that it's in compliance with the ambient air quality standards.
Tim, you mentioned that the planning board's involved.
Just with the ash house.
Just as the ash house.
Correct.
I met Peter from the planning board. I don't know who the other gentlemen are, but I wanted to find out if you had any questions you might like to ask, since we're doing this presentation now, regarding the ash house, or...
Just one, actually. Yeah, you want me to-
Sure, please.
Peter Boynton, 320 Stevens, and also a member of the planning board. And I'm actually not here for this topic, but
Since you're here.
I'm very glad that you have them here, and it's great to hear that you're getting this information. And Will Brader also gave the planning board a tour when we reviewed the renovation, and it was excellent and very helpful. We really appreciate that. And for TEC Environmental, my question is actually a follow-up to Dr. Trowbridge on disposition and deposition. Does any of your monitoring regime look at what may be coming out of the air into the lake, which is a surface water supply for us, cumulatively over time? When you mentioned you've been doing this for 14 years, I wondered if there's any measurement over time of deposition from the airborne into that surface drinking water. It's only a few miles away, yeah, but that was it.
All right, thank you,
Thank
Peter. Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah,
The
excellent. answer
is no. We're not looking at those types of phenomena, I guess, in terms of what's landing in the lake or depositionally. So it's out of our scope, I guess.
Well, we had the water department here earlier this year, and they went through all the various testings for heavy metals and a whole huge list of from bacteria to everything, just about. And I don't know the specifics of what you do, Tim, but what comes out of the plant, would it include a very small percentage of something?
Well, particularly,
That would be-
Mark, you're more expert in that than I am, but I mean, obviously, the plant is controlling.
Because our water quality is
to the
excellent.
requirements, but,
Yeah.
Certainly, it's not a net zero emission source. So
Yeah.
in terms of deposition, I don't know what we could really expect to say or predict.
Yeah, again, not knowing where the location of the water source is, I mean, it depends if it's in the prevailing wind direction, whether there be any particular, minute concentrations that might be deposited in that particular lake. I'm sure when the plant was going through its permitting process 30 years ago as part of the PSD permit process, there was a dispersion modeling and probably a deposition evaluation at that point in time. And since then, they've actually added more controls to the system, so I would assume that, the emissions are even, far better than they were. And Mr. McCarthy could probably speak to that better than I could on that part of it.
Actually, there are two priority pollutants that arguably could be of concern. One is acid gases, but you have a scrubber, so that is not a concern. The other is mercury. But when the plant was built, mercury was not controlled, and mercury in the waste stream was a lot higher than it is right now. Fluorescent bulbs, for example, thermostats, et cetera, et cetera. And since that time, the plant, as other plants in the nation, as all other plants in the nation, have put in place a sophisticated activated carbon system to absorb the mercury. So consequently, that is not an issue either. I know that we have tests for the water before and after treatment. I have looked at the results in the past. There's nothing that stands out at all. But if there was to be a concern, I would say it would be mercury, but 35 years ago, not today. Not today.
Putting a sort of a belt and suspenders analogy, as you know, we've mentioned the air quality controls, but I think, you know, there's also a behavioral element to operating the facility that, you know, grows with, you know, knowledge and things like that, you know, getting a hot load of thermostats and so forth. So I think, you know, again, source control in terms of what's going in into the combustion is also, you know, sort of an evolution of, you know, knowing what's in your feedstock. So I don't know if you want to expound on that at all, but anyway.
As a part of the regulations that the Mass DEP implemented back in the early 2000s, there's a mercury separation program that we participate along with other municipal waste combustors in the United States. So we actually contribute hundreds of thousands of dollars every year to help separate mercury out of the waste stream. And we've worked with the local boards of health, and it started with button battery recycling and going around schools looking for sources in medical facilities. So to Joe's point, over the years, the amount of mercury in the waste stream has significantly diminished and has had a really tremendous impact on public health in a positive way.
And we have an ongoing program with an employee from Wheeler that does the entire region, that does mercury collection programs. So contractors bring us their old thermostats. We have digital thermometers for people to exchange their old mercury thermometers. We have a button cell battery collection program right here at the office. And it's out around town as well. So we have very good success with that, which is really good. As well as the fluorescent light bulbs. We can return those to here, and I think the DPW also has a shed. You can bring those as well. So that's done a good service to the residents and obviously the waste stream in general to get that out of it.
Great, thank you. And again, just really retouching some subjects that we started with you know, our prime role with the emissions testing and the air quality compliance, and the records review on site and Mass DEP. And as I mentioned before, again, you know, we have universal access to the records on site if we ever need to see them. And certainly, again, Mass DEP is just another, you know, ground truth for everything that we see that we get directly from Wheeler-Brader. But then it's always good to go in and do that file review and just see how it all comes around, and just verifying that it's all been stamped in, meaning, you know, somebody's read it, it's logged in, the information's there, so the loop is closed in that respect. The reporting review, again, you know, periodically, you know, we'll get reports directly from Richard. You know, routine monitoring. We mentioned the continuous environmental monitoring system. You know, calibration records. We talked a little bit before about the deviation reports, and certainly there's semi-annual and annual performance reports that go along with that. That, you know, will basically summate, you know, deviations or whatever happened over the course of the year. And again, it's a summation of, you know, there are imperfections in the system, but I think it all comes back to on par. You know, that annual review, theirs and ours, you know, our goal is to, you know, find that to be, you know, in parallel, in check, you know, that we're, you know, the back check works.
Thank you.
Sure. Emissions testing, you know, Mr. McCarthy mentioned it, you know, every quarter plus every 9 months for the more rigorous testing. So our role in that, we get all of the protocols, the testing protocols pre-test. We get to review those, and then when we go on site, so let's just say a typical stack testing event would be 3 days. So we'll either pick at least a half day or a full day to go out there, such that we see the beginning and the end of test runs. And so since we're not out there the entire period of the testing regimen, what we do is again, that universal access, we go, we're up on the platforms talking to DECO is the company that they use. We're talking to their operators. We're watching the leak checks to verify, you know, pre and post whether or not, you know, the test that was done is a legitimate test. You know, obviously you know, sampling, it's not really telling us, but it's going to tell us, you know, that the sample train, you know, has integrity, and you know, the test can then be, you know, converted for sampling. We're in the laboratory trailer for all of their preparation to send all their sampling out. We have access to the control room as well, so it's a real 360-degree view of when I'm on the site. Once I check in, you know, I know where my routes of travel are, and I'm at liberty to move around. You know, with the 21H testing that was mentioned before, there's a soil, or an ash testing component that comes along with that. There's another contractor that's on site collecting those samples, making composite samples, getting their samples ready for laboratory analysis as well. We follow them around, and I think it's really, the way I look at it is it's really a general canvassing of everybody that's involved in the process, from Richard to the control room operator, to the guys that are running the job in the laboratory, and then certainly the crew that are up doing the individual testing.
So, Tim, to sum it up, things are going well.
Things are going well. Yes.
Okay. Very, very good. Have you, is this?
I had some pictures.
There you go.
If I'm not in them, I don't want to look.
So again, I think it's just trying to demonstrate that 360 review. You know, up on a platform, you know, watching the test go on. Soil sampling's a small picture in the middle. Certainly, upper right is just some snapshots of the control room. Again, you know, appreciate the accessibility, and then some log sheets in the laboratory trailer, and then certainly log sheets for the testing operators. Again, just making sure, you know, this is the test we're doing, begins and ends, set points along the way. So just that plethora of information that obviously it comes summarized in the emission testing report, but it's a good way just to audit, you know, the interim steps along the way. And you know, they're used to our presence there, so again, the contractor is very open and accommodating. But in sum, yes, everything is going accordingly, and you know, and we're down into the fourth quarter, so to speak.
Good.
Of the year.
No, thank you very much. Very good presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, and Mark and Richard. What's that?
I'm not done with the question.
Oh, you had, okay.
You have a contract to do this, correct?
We have a contract with the town. Correct.
That's with the town, it's not obligated to Wheelbrader, so that relationship is with the town, not with Wheelbrader through the state or the permit or anything, okay?
Correct.
You mentioned a fourth quarter, is there an end to this, or this is sort of an ongoing thing?
It's we'll come back with our annual report that summarizes the entirety of the operating year 2017. So it's really
Well, this is the fourth quarter of this year.
Fourth quarter, yes, exactly. It's the fourth
Not
quarter
in
of the year.
general.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry. Yep.
It's a continual obligation as long as we keep up our end of things.
Correct. Our contract runs roughly from June, you know, whatever, May 31 or June 1 to May 31. So, you know, our contract sort of is mid-year to mid-year, but we report on a January to December. So basically, end of January, beginning of February, we'll see all of the final reporting from 2017, and then our annual report comes forward in March.
Brian, is there a term on the contract, do you know?
3-year contract?
I believe so. I think, I actually have to look at that, but yeah.
I think a 3-year contract, and I think we just renewed 2. So I think we're good for a few more years.
I think I'm done now.
Okay. No. No, thank you, Tim, thank you, Mark, thank you,
You're welcome.
Richard.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. Great tour of the facility. Presentation was right on spot. And I also just want to make one comment on the water. The water department does all the heavy metal testing and are responsible for maintaining our water, period. And they do a great job. All the parts per million levels and so forth are extremely low. And we have an excellent, excellent quality water supply from Lake Cochituate. So I just wanted to reiterate that point. Again, I want to thank you very much for coming in today and doing the presentation. Do any other board members have any, or anyone else have any questions you'd like to?
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you,
Thank
gentlemen.
you. So next on the agenda, we had marijuana discussion, but we have here, I have, Peter, you mentioned you're from the planning board. I don't know the other gentleman. Are you from the planning board?
No, we're from, we're both advisors to the Osgood project.
Okay. Well, you have here's how it's going to go tonight. I had a group call me, and they wanted a couple minutes to just present something on the medical marijuana and to look at their facility. And I didn't want to bring it to you. I wanted them to bring it to us. So I'll give you a few minutes if you want, or you can sit through. What we're discussing has nothing to do with what you're discussing. You can sit through it, but you can only participate and ask a question based on retail locations. Has nothing to do with Osgood. I can't accept any questions regarding Osgood. You can make a statement in 2-3 minutes, and that was about it. What were you told?
I don't think we were told anything. We understand.
Can you?
My name is Rex Johnston. I'm a resident 35 Constituent Drive.
Hi.
Thank you for saying it correctly. I'm still trying to learn it. I'm on the advisory board with the Goldsteins on the Massachusetts Innovation Works. We were here just to listen. Because in our Dan Leary and I had been presenting our situation and application to the planning board over the last four or five meetings, Peter. I mean, it's been a while. And because if you remember at the town meeting, they expressed some concern that they had not had a chance to really review the proposal in detail, which was true. So we took that as our charge. So for the last 4 meetings, we have had extensive meetings and reviews with them. We've had tours on our facility with the people who are doing various parts of the project, potentially, explaining in detail what it is. We have a 45-deck presentation, which we'd be delighted to give you. I'm sure you don't want that. We boiled it down to 14. But those are all open. And we were told that the planning board was coming tonight because they had expressed some desire to talk to you all about this application. So Dan and I are here just to listen to the questions, and if there's open questions, we will pursue the answers for you.
Okay, no, thank you for coming.
That's it.
I was under the impression you wanted to ask us about a tour or something of a medical facility, but that's what the gentleman who called me spoke to me about. But the only thing we're discussing are retail stores, retail marijuana establishments in town, period. I cannot take any questions about the Osgood
Well,
Landing.
let me state our position on that, if you don't mind. We have in our application, we have said we are a wholesaler and we are pursuing no retail outlets in our establishment.
At the end of our conversation with Peter, you made your, thank you. You made your,
That's it.
okay, no, appreciate it. Thank you. Peter, please come forward.
Being signed.
Thank you very, very much for coming tonight.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Brian filled me in, and really it was more based on an email about what the planning board was looking for from the Board of Health. Could you just verbalize it more so all of us can hear it?
Sure.
Thanks.
So the planning board has spent a number of meetings listening to the applicant for the cultivation facility at Osgood Landing. They're proposing 1 million square feet of cultivation that would be combined with research and innovation center. And the board has also been discussing different potential uses in town, not just at Osgood Landing, but cultivation, processing, research, testing, and one of them is retail. And I think it's fair to say that the focus of the planning board is to try to be as thorough as possible, to get as much information as possible about all these topics so that we're as informed as possible. And at the last meeting, I raised the question that when it comes to the issue of retail outlets or not, that when we look at that across the national landscape of an addiction crisis across the country, really focused on opioids, not cannabis, but nonetheless, addiction crisis, that shouldn't we as a board be informed by someone that has more subject matter expertise than we do on the planning board about whether or not there are any issues with respect to public health and potential retail outlets in town. The planning director said that she'd reach out, and the last I heard was that the Board of Health would have a conversation, and the planning board has asked someone from the Board of Health to come to the meeting and talk to us about, from your subject matter expertise of public health, what's your perspective of public health issues potentially related or not to potential cannabis retail establishments. And it's all part of this broad effort to inform the planning board as much as possible. And this is an area that we don't have expertise on, so we are hoping that the Board of Health can offer a perspective.
No, thank you. The rules and regulations, as you know, have not been finalized.
Correct.
And are severely lacking. And as a matter of fact, they'll probably be extended till later in 2018. And a lot of communities are extending their moratorium to later, even the ones that voted
Right.
in favor of recreational marijuana are extending moratoriums because I have a feeling they're starting to think twice. And I did put a call out to somebody at the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards who would know what various boards around the state are doing or thinking about, and I haven't received any information back yet. But since we don't have rules and regulations as to where we're going to come in, whether it be we would regulate edibles, would we regulate the making of edibles like a bakery? I don't know. And I tried to find the answer, and I can't find it yet, as far as we have nothing to go by solidly that'll say the Board of Health has responsibility in this, this, and this. The latest I read was, hang on just for a second. There was an article in the Globe, and again, there's not a lot written. There's a lot on medical marijuana. Now, there's a lot in Colorado.
Right.
There's an executive summary that Brian sent around that I read. It was an 18-page summary of, I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not.
I strongly urge you to read it.
Would it be possible for Brian to forward that to the planning department for the board to take a look?
Absolutely. I talked to Gina about it the other day. I can send you a copy. I might have an extra copy around here somewhere.
That'd be helpful. Thank
Steve,
you.
I have a copy in front of me right now.
Thank you.
I believe the entire report is around 228 pages. The executive summary is about 18
50.
pages.
Oh, this was like
And this is on retail marijuana, public health, the Retail Marijuana Public Health Advisory Committee in Colorado. And let me briefly read a couple of sentences here, because some of this data from Colorado is really scary. Weekly marijuana use by adolescents is associated with impaired learning, memory, math, and reading, even 28 days after last use. Weekly use is also associated with failure to graduate from high schools. Adolescents and young adults who use marijuana are more likely to experience psychotic symptoms as adults, such as hallucinations, paranoia, delusional beliefs, and feeling emotionally unresponsive, etc., etc., etc.
Do you mind
I
if
also
do you
have-
mind if I ask what page you're reading off? Is that from the summary or the full report?
Yes.
What page on the summary?
It doesn't have a number on it.
7.
7?
Yeah.
It does?
Marijuana use.
Oh, it's page
driving.
6, excuse me. It's 6 in the bottom, I see it down there.
Great, thank you.
No, this is page,
Oh, you got a different page.
yeah, I have a different page.
But
Peter, sort of, when you look at those kind of things, a cautionary thing I would sort of look at in terms of things like that, and I'm not speaking as a fan of it, you have to look at that as sort of a chicken and egg kind of a question, or a cause and effect kind of a question. Right. The people that are in that category of social problems, is that, let's just say, caused by marijuana, or those people who are more likely to use marijuana at a higher rate? Is sort of, where does that two-way street come in? So your question is, having retail outlets in North Andover, is that a public health risk as opposed to not having them here, but perhaps they're in Haverhill? Can you flesh out the question a little bit more, just so?
Well, it's hard for me to flesh out the question because we're not public health experts. So let me just give one example. As we've been hearing about this cultivation facility, we as a board have also done our own bits of research with California or Colorado and Oregon. But the things we were looking for, we never found this because we don't look at the public health side. And so we got a lot of information, but this is great to have, so thank you. Really what we're asking is, as a public health entity, do you have any observations that a planning board should be aware of as we're considering these issues, and in particular, the retail issue? So I know that I'm being a little bit broad here, but it's on purpose because I'm hard pressed to really define what the public health questions might be related to a large marijuana facility, or more specifically, potential marijuana recreational retail outlets. I hesitate to try to frame that question more because the way I framed the question could limit the consideration. We're really not coming to ask, is it bad? We're coming to ask, we don't have public health expertise, you do. We are in the process of getting as much input as we can. You know, on a totally different topic, we've got before the planning board a cell tower. And we've had residents come in asking us very good questions. Have you as the planning board considered this? Have you considered that? Did you ask these questions? And it really was another example of the sort of approach we're trying to take as we listen to the cannabis proposals. Have we asked enough questions? Have we asked the right questions? Have we got the right subject matter experts to come and help inform us? Public health against this backdrop across the country seemed like a good question to ask, but we almost need you to help us even frame the question. Does that make sense?
I think it makes perfect sense. One of the things that came out of looking at this Colorado experience is that they kind of did this without doing this in the first place. And what they've done is retrospectively, as part of their law legalizing this, is that they mandated that this board collect this data. And I'm not an expert in marijuana myself, though a few things kind of struck me. One is that there is fetal exposure among pregnant women exposing their fetuses. I seem to remember a figure of around 6%.
Some breast milk.
It does get into the breast milk. A couple of other things is that this is now the law of the land, and so you have other drugs that are legal in society: tobacco, alcohol, prescription drugs. Well, none of these things are free access. They're all regulated to some degree, because if you have free access, you have higher incidences of tobacco use disorders, alcohol abuse, and prescription drug abuse. So there are some legitimate things about restricting access to some degree. One of the things that struck me is that in places where access becomes easy, you get near daily or daily use. That's something that shows up in this executive summary a lot. And that's where the problem seems to be. It's not in the real recreational user who's just doing it for kicks. It's somebody who's doing the near daily or daily use that you have the health problems with. And The other part was poisoning, and the poisoning seems to occur with the edibles, and the poisonings occur with the edibles and with children younger than the age of majority, and sometimes young children. And so one of the things that they do in Colorado is they've been monitoring the use of marijuana-related diagnosis codes in emergency room visits and things like that. I think that this is really, it's an excellent summary. I mean, I think everybody on this board has their own personal feelings about this, and I don't want to let those personal feelings come across, because we're trying to make we're trying to make policy based on evidence and what the best public good is. And I think that we try to keep our personal feelings out of it. But I think that if you're going to make policy, you really need evidence, and this is a nice source of evidence that's been done for us now. It is particular to Colorado, which is not Massachusetts, but it's something that we should be paying attention to. So if you're looking for, what are the places that we can get into trouble, it's, access by the wrong ages. What do we do to prevent people from getting to that daily or near daily use, because that seems to be associated with the health problems. And, just for the same reason, when I take a medical history from a patient in my office, I ask them how much alcohol they drink, how much cigarettes they smoke, and I can very quickly tell whether they are a problem user or not, and typically they will have health problems come from that. So I think those are all legitimate public health concerns. I don't know how you factor that into your planning board decisions, but I think that this is, the Colorado experience is definitely something that we should look to for a source of real, unbiased data that will help us make policy.
In addition to that, the law is ambiguous. At the federal level, cannabis remains a prohibited substance by way of the Controlled Substance Act of 1970. And yet, in 2014, the Obama-Farr Amendment was signed into law prohibiting the Justice Department from spending funds to interfere with implementation of state medical cannabis laws. So it's illegal on the federal basis, but it's not enforced. It doesn't mean that Jeff Sessions, our Attorney General, couldn't say, well, wait a second, or it doesn't mean that the Republican House of Representatives could say, now we're going to start to enforce this. And then again, you have marijuana pills. Marinol, it's a Schedule 3, it's not a Schedule 1, it's a pill, and you can take it. So what they're talking about at Osgood Landing to sell it to distributors, how? In the form of pills? In the form of just raw marijuana? Is that legal?
This isn't a Board of Health issue, though.
But he brought up the subject because we are all concerned. And I'm saying that it's squirrely. There's a lot of elements that go into it. And we're not getting good direction from the federal government, or for that matter, for the state. So we have to figure it out ourselves. And we don't have the expertise to do this. But the preliminary data, certainly the report from Colorado, is scary. And the law is scary too.
That's objective. The only thing I could find really a Board of Health member, I wish I hadn't gotten a call back yet or an email from who I wanted to, was one Board of Health member in a different town was concerned about the health impacts of legal marijuana, and that voters backed legalization out of concern for those facing legal trouble for possessing pot, not necessarily the creation of a new industry. So, and this was in the Globe too. So I'm almost looking at towns are starting to second guess what went through, according to this Globe article. It's a large article too. It's 3 pages on my paper. And even towns that supported recreational marijuana legalization, including Brookline, Hull, Abington, Chicopee, Mansfield, officials are considering temporary moratoriums on retail pot, local officials say. Same thing with Brookline too. So I think people are thinking more about it. I see your predicament you're in, and it's the same predicament we're in. You don't want to hear my personal opinion of marijuana. I'm a pharmacist. How can I be in favor of retail marijuana? It's a drug. And when I read the report from Colorado, I thought I was reading a package insert for prescription medicine. All the people that said it's not addictive, the people that said that it doesn't affect your ability to think or drive or to do your daily activities, cognitive, behavioral aspects. According to this report, when you read it, it was an eye-opener for me. It was huge. And I would have made this a prescription medicine if I had read this and then didn't know it was.
I respectfully disagree. Earlier, I recited a section of it that's really scary.
Yeah,
about the adverse effects.
Well, I'm telling you, that's why I'm saying they're scary.
Oh, okay.
It's horrifying.
I misunderstood you.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
no, I would have
Okay.
made it a prescription. It's
Okay.
such a strong,
Okay.
it has such strong effects on the body. So, and this report is updated every 2 years. And there's a lot in it. What did you say? It's over 200 pages or?
It's over 200 pages.
Yeah.
28.
So,
But it does make a distinction between, it seems that the problems are with the frequent daily or near daily use. That's where the health problems seem to be.
yeah, one thing I found interesting also is,
And it really is not a report about medical marijuana. That's a different
No.
discussion.
No.
Medical cannabis has got an entirely different literature, and it's got a different experience, and
I think what the extent of the question that I can frame is it was a question about recreational and retail
right.
in this town, and I'm trying to frame it to that extent to say, really, I think the planning board is trying to separate that from the medical side.
We have to. Yeah.
Yes.
And one thing, just pick up on what Frank said, was in that report, again, we have the report to go by, it's a great report, is, let's say you have one parent who uses, and a lot of adults use daily or intermittent marijuana during the week. So, and a lot of people will buy, well, edibles is going down according to Colorado a little, but I'm sure it's still a big industry. But when you have edibles in the house and you have parents that like to smoke it or eat it, somehow kids tend to get it, and that's been a problem too, when I was reading about Denver. So how do you protect, what safeties, like in Colorado, they try to have child-safe packaging, from what I understand. So what safeties in a retail outlet would you put to protect children from being able to get at the product? Well, if the adults take it home, there's nothing you can do. This would be like going into the pharmacy and getting a very strong bottle of cough medicine. Well, how do you protect it from the kids and keep them away from it? There's no difference. They're both types of drugs. One's a lot stronger than the other. So that was addressed in the report also. But based on side effects and based on...
You have a great answer to your question right now.
it's a political question.
Yes.
It's going to be answered by voters.
It's tough.
Well, a number of you have mentioned trying to separate the sort of personal view from,
You have
the
to.
objective.
Yeah.
And when the planning board was discussing this, we used exactly the same terminology to say, hey, we may all have a personal view of retail, but let's try to bring in subject matter experts to help us understand where there may be issues or not, rather than just acting on our personal, which of course we don't want to do. So this has been enormously helpful that you have identified this summary. It's very illuminating to hear this discussion. The planning board was interested in having one of our members here to sort of hear the interactive discussion among your board, but we're very much hoping that you can still have a representative of your board at the planning board to sort of summarize the perspective of your members. And I don't think we expect, an on-off switch, a clear, yes, no answer. We're just looking for perspectives from a public health, informed body, and those perspectives would be very helpful for us.
Peter, to separate it even farther, it's legal. So we may not have anything to do with this. Now, we can give you our opinion, but most of it will be personal because we have no rules or regs to go by. So now you ask, well, what is the board's opinion on opening a retail establishment, a liquor store, a tobacco store, whatever it might be in town, a store that sells marijuana and edibles? It may not end up being a Board of Health issue in any way. I don't know. So, I think we have to look at it like that too. I have my personal opinions. I read the report. I was horrified. But you're asking us to look at, as a board of health, based on rules and regs that come down federal and state and what we make up, what do we think of a retail store opening in town? Very difficult to I think it's very difficult for us to give an
Peter,
opinion
I
like
thought
that.
that was a dead issue, because I'm looking at questions and answers on this proposed project here at 1600 Osgood Street. It says Valley Green Grove. I don't know if it's from them, but anyways, one of the questions is, are you planning to sell marijuana in North Andover? And the answer is no. Then it goes on further to say the marijuana that is grown and the manufacturing facility will be distributed to Massachusetts state-approved medical marijuana dispensaries throughout the state. So now you're saying that it's resurrected its head and we may have dispensaries in North Andover? I thought it was dead.
No, this is a separate
it's a little
question, Joe.
different
This
from
is,
that.
he's not
So-
coming to us with a question about Osgood, I think.
Right. The applicant at Osgood Landing has already said they will not apply to sell retail at Osgood Landing. However, towns have to look at
There are
what
other
the
retail
law-
establishments that
Okay.
make
what
them,
the
and they have to
what
look
the
at
law
that.
could now allow in
Okay.
any town. And
Okay.
so towns have to say, well, okay, we will allow this, we'll prohibit this, we'll allow this, we'll prohibit this. So this is other than Osgood Landing.
Yeah, this is not a unique to Osgood project
We have
question.
3 choices. We can either allow it, we can regulate it, or we can not allow it.
And it's really up to
That's
the
my understanding, but if you decide to regulate it, you have to regulate it uniformly.
So I would just offer to you, from, again, my perspective, the value of listening to this discussion. Even if all you could say to the planning board is, there's no regulation, so you wouldn't even know what a Board of Health role is yet, to me, that's useful information. Planning board doesn't know that. You know that because you're the Board of Health. So those types of observations that, may seem obvious to you, may not be apparent to the planning board, and I still think could be very helpful. So again, I would reiterate, we very much hope you take us up on the invitation to share whatever public health perspectives you can as we, try to fairly and objectively address these issues.
Peter, who ultimately would make that decision as far as selling recreational marijuana in North Andover? I would think that it would be a warrant item in the town annual meeting.
So it could be a general bylaw from the Board of Selectmen, voted on at a town meeting. It could be a zoning bylaw from the planning board. It could be both.
But there are restrictions and time limits on that. You can't, I didn't know what the questions, sort of the thing of the conversation was, but I think in terms of how we could offer specific advice versus general advice, we need to sort of look into the law a little bit. I happen to download it on a computer at home, but I don't have it here. But my understanding is that Board of Health really doesn't have any role in making that specific decision. It may come down to the point where eventually we will regulate it to the extent that we regulate cigarette sales and that we issue permits, but we don't say, yes, there can be cigarettes sold or not in North Andover. We just say, this is the regulation of how you can sell cigarettes, and we inspect, and they make an application to that.
Well, we do regulate what type of cigarettes you can sell. You can only sell them in packs of 20.
Right.
They can't be flavored. We can't sell blunt wraps. There's actually a very specific regulation about how you can sell cigarettes in North Andover. So if we were asked to do something like that, I don't know why we wouldn't be empowered.
Well, we could write a regulation, but it couldn't co-opt state law.
No, we
But-
couldn't write something in,
Yeah.
but we could write something that exceeds the state standard. The local regulations do that quite often. I mean,
Yeah.
the state has a minimum standard, and the local regulation can apply special conditions that are unique to the town for whatever the needs of the town or its citizens are. I mean, we do that all the time, like our setbacks from the wetlands in the watershed area. So, I mean, our regulations exceed the state regulations. We exceed Title V. So I don't know why we wouldn't have some ability to regulate that. But again, I think that this Cannabis Control Commission is going to come out with regulations, and will be somewhat bound by them. But the Board of Health has got fairly wide latitude to regulate things on the basis of health, is my understanding.
You know, what I'm hearing from this, just as a takeaway, an outsider here listening to you all, is in trying to frame the question, I'm sort of hearing it framed in two ways. One is, what's a potential Board of Health role or roles. But the other one is, as members of the Board of Health, you have some expertise in public health writ large. And I think from our perspective on the planning board, we would value your perspective in both areas. Potential roles of the Board of Public Health, don't know yet. Regulations haven't been formed, but here's your authority as you have described. From a public health perspective, I don't think we're looking for an answer. I think we're looking for an informed public health perspectives, if possible.
I think what you're asking for is, when you go to town meeting, anybody who goes to town meeting, you'll see on the warrant article, it'll say, Selectmen Board recommends this action, Finance Committee recommends this action, Planning Board recommends this action. In all the years that I've been on the Board of Health, we've never taken a position and recommended for or against a particular warrant article.
Right.
I don't know that we couldn't do that if we wanted to, but we've just never been asked to do that. But you, as a member of the planning board, you have something concrete in front of you. You have a
Well,
question.
actually, we have, Frank, but it's never been printed in the article. But
Yeah.
we've had things where, as chairman, I'd gone and argued at town meeting on certain things, but
Yeah.
I get the point.
But yeah, but I mean, the thing is you have a specific question that you can debate on your board, and you do so in public, come to a conclusion, then report that conclusion as a recommendation on the warrant.
Right.
So what we don't have here really is a specific question. We can give a general attitude, and, the way that we would potentially approach a question like that. And I think we would try to approach it dispassionately and based on evidence.
Right. Now, just to be clear, if you're able to come to the planning board and offer us your perspectives, we are not looking for that type of town meeting recommends or don't recommend. We're not asking you to do that at this point. There is no warrant at this point. And that would be your call, I suppose, down the road if this does come before a town meeting. But we're not asking for that up or down recommendation if you come to the planning board. We're asking you to share your perspectives in terms of Board of Health and subject matter experts in public health.
Peter, we'd really need some time to mull over this, considering that the state doesn't have much in place right now. But having said that, when would you be looking for someone or some of us to be there?
I think Gene
They're meeting
had
Monday night.
forwarded November 7th.
I don't think so.
But again, not for an up or down, it's just share the perspectives. Because we're not ready to give an up or down. We're just gathering information at this point.
But you're meeting Monday night, but that's...
No, I just made that up.
Oh,
They
okay.
can, they can stream this from North Andover CAM, just so they can see the meeting and hear all of us.
But
Like you're doing.
the difference is that if someone could come to the planning board members may have an opportunity to ask questions, and you get that great interactive quality, which, quite frankly, I didn't
agree with
expect I was doing tonight.
I
thought I was going to
hoping.
listen to your discussion, but this is good. It's interactive, and that's great.
See, I would think on this, normally we wouldn't discuss it unless the planning board asks us to look at it. Of course, we'll talk about it like we're doing now.
Yeah, good.
But I would think this would just, does the town want a retail establishment or not? And that's the end of it. Like, do you want another liquor store? I mean, since it's a legal business now in the state, our opinion is whether we're for it or against it is really, to me, a non-issue, because I'm not going to be for another burger place opening up, or it's a legal business.
Well, maybe not framed so much as for or against it, but rather, here are some public health-related issues, even if they are unresolved. Here are unresolved public health issues that we don't have an answer for you, but these are the type of issues that are out there in the public health community related to this. That's not a for or against, it's just informing whether or not there are public health issues without even answering whether or not they're resolved.
Right, you're not at the point where you're asking us for a stance on something, you're asking for input to.
Correct.
You looking at the whole milieu of multiple questions that include health, but include other things
Right.
as well.
That's about it, yeah.
To help
Perfect.
your board making some
Well,
sort of a
he want, it would be at the meeting.
position or
He wants it at the
doing
meeting.
something on
We could do it for discussion.
retail
I-
in Massachusetts.
I appreciate that. I would agree with that. We're really not looking for the up or down. We just share your expertise with us as we're considering it. You know, we're pretty well informed on dimensional requirements, parking ratios, the sort of things that come to a planning board. But with this one element of the larger issue, it seemed like it was a good idea to ask for input on the public health side.
It is a good idea.
It's an area that we don't have
you.
expertise, and you know what? I could imagine residents coming to the planning board, just like they did for the cell tower, and saying, did you ask about public health impacts? I'd like to be able to answer that question by saying yes, and we had somebody from the Board of Health come, they shared with us public health issues. We got their input. I think it's important that we be able to say that as part of demonstrating that we're being as thorough and, as you said, dispassionate as possible.
Peter, as far as being thorough, since we don't have any final rules or regulations and how it's going to, if it's going to be under our auspices in any way, can't you set aside a time at a later date when something comes down? I mean, do you have a timeline that you have to fulfill on this to get the Board of Health, somebody from the board in, or? Because there's nothing out there for, I'd like to grab onto things. I mean,
Well, there is a timeline.
There is a
There's a timeline in April. I mean, the thing is that one of the pieces of material I saw here said that for patients who are going to have legalized retail marijuana, they have to have an application in April. And the cities and towns have to have something in place by then if they want to ban it, regulate it, or, am I right about that? Yeah, so there is a
2018.
deadline.
This may be pushed back again, but the deadline for the Cannabis Control Commission to accept applications is April 1st. They have to have final regulations by July 1st, and that may get pushed back. If they don't push it back, or they quote-unquote default, then any medical marijuana establishment in the state can then start selling recreational marijuana at their own, guise. So that's a timeline. That's something that we have coming up. I do know that if the town's going to do a moratorium or do a warrant article, that's going to be coming up this coming winter and getting ready for May town meeting.
Right.
So with that being said, there's a timeline. It's not November 7th, but it's quick. It's definitely quickly approaching. So I think having some input at a planning board meeting is definitely in our best interest.
I thought that at the town meeting this past, we did put in we put in a temporary time-certain moratorium, didn't we, in North Andover?
A temporary moratorium.
To, I think, the end of 2018.
I don't remember the exact date, but I thought it might have
Do you
been
happen
this
to remember? The end of December 2018.
Okay.
So there's sort of an existing moratorium that was allowed,
But in the meantime.
but you don't want to wait till that point, yes?
And we have one applicant before us for cultivation and processing, and we could expect potentially others coming before us, and we should have an informed answer on what we should allow and what we shouldn't allow, and so we're hoping for some help with that. And not asking you to make the decision, just within your area of
Good.
expertise would
you're not going to have as informed, no, seriously, you're not going to have as an informed answer as you would like, because we don't have any rules to go by. Just to, one of us
I think we're arguing the wrong
will
question.
figure out who's going to go. Absolutely, of course we will.
Thank you very
Of course we
much.
will.
Thank you.
But
one of you should
I like to
definitely-
give
definitely go.
complete information if I can, or at least more informed information if I can. I don't like to give
Right.
a partial answer.
We'd love that too.
Well, I think the question is very simple, is are we going to send somebody to represent the Board of Health? And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Of course we are.
Thank you.
When is the meeting? The next meeting?
November 7th.
November 7th, Tuesday night. 7 o'clock, right here.
And we're not concerned about the regulations, we're concerned about the public health issues, period.
Yeah.
So that's what you want
Sure.
from us.
Yeah.
Public health issues.
Yeah.
There's a host of them.
Well, the public health issues would be the executive summary has a lot of the public health issues that are pure data, and that's it. It's just pure data.
You know, it means something when that comes from someone on the Board of Health saying, here's the best we've found so far. It is data, whether or not it's objective. That's different than one of us Googling it and
Right.
calling it up, because you have a basis to evaluate this, to
Yeah,
some
and-
extent.
No, of course.
And Larry and I was...
Of course we'll go. Of course, we'll figure out who's going to go.
Thank you.
Yeah, we were
Absolutely.
just talking about that, and this 18-page summary, we may want to further shrink it to maybe a page or two,
Well,
and then talk about that at the
I
planning
can
board.
assure you, I'll read it, and we'll make sure the whole board gets copies.
I have your email address. I
Yeah,
can send
great.
you just the executive summary or the entire thing if you want. It's 300 pages.
I think you should send executive summary and a link to the whole thing, if you don't mind.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah, do we have a link to the whole report, too?
Yes.
Do we do?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, do you mind if I comment briefly on a separate issue?
What's the issue?
The lake.
The link?
Lake.
Lake.
Oh, the lake, of course.
So,
Sure.
I'm a native of North Andover, grew up here, paddled in the lake with my dad in the 50s and 60s. North Andover High School graduate, and went away for 30 years in the Coast Guard, and unexpectedly moved back to my hometown about 4 years ago. Didn't expect that. And went back out on the lake, came down to the town hall to volunteer for a committee, and was asked to be on the planning board, which I'm happy.
Easy one.
Yeah, well,
No work, no work.
Not so much.
happy to serve. And one of the selectmen asked me what I've been doing the last 30 years, and no sooner did I get the two words Coast Guard out than they all in unison said, "You're our harbor master." And I said, wait a minute, as far as I know, we don't have a harbor. So I am actually,
Right, you work for the Coast Guard as a captain.
yeah, I'm actually your volunteer harbor master on
Excellent.
the lake, and for the last several years, I've been helping with DPW, conservation, planning, and sustainability for lake-wide cleanups twice a year. We've hauled an enormous amount of stuff out of the lake, big things, little things. And tonight at your meeting, listening to your description and how you had the water department here,
Yeah.
I just want to tell you that it was wonderful and reassuring to hear the Board of Health focus on the condition of the water in the lake. I think it's great. I was very happy to hear it, and I thank you for your service in doing that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. While you're up here, Peter, what did they find in our water supply? What did they pull out?
Well, I can tell you that I personally pulled out 8 of 10 derelict docks that had been drifting and sinking in the lake. Styrofoam, pressure-treated wood, other materials.
Oh, boy.
The Department of Public Works helped with another 2, total of 10. And we're up to now the 23rd truck or car tire that we've pulled out of the lake. I don't know why there's so many tires in the lake. Hundreds of bags of bottles, cans, bags, a wide array of furniture.
Wow.
Metal pipes, metal parts.
Do you have a dredge? I mean, do you have a dredge that
No,
pulls this up, or?
I have a canoe that my dad used to paddle me around in. It's a canvas-covered wooden canoe that Bruce Tebow nicknamed the Canoe Tug, because it all goes in the canoe.
Furniture?
The furniture, the docks, everything. And a mailbox, a wall safe, and I kid you not,
Unbelievable.
a kitchen sink.
Wow. And
Okay.
did you put it on Craigslist?
No.
Okay.
No, it all goes to the ramp at the water treatment plant, and they get an email with a photo, and they haul it away.
Wow.
But we've had wonderful volunteers for the twice a year. In the spring, Earth Day, we do it with sustainability. That's townwide. And in the fall, and it was just last Saturday, we have volunteers with the high school, planning, sustainability, conservation, DPW, and we've also successfully engaged the institutional property owners. The North Andover Country Club, as Hooks noted, organized a self-cleanup of their shoreline, which was terrific. Rolling Ridge and Brooks School had to postpone it because they had events on last Saturday, but they're doing their shoreline.
Excellent.
Trustees of reservations, and Edgewood, and we also had someone walking the shoreline at the Stevens Estate. But there are chronic areas where there's a lot of trash and debris in the lake, and so we've seen progress over the last 3 years. That's the good news. There's less. And the bad news is there are still chronic areas on 133 from the Butcher Boy area to Ray's Pond. That's always bad. And Pleasant Street from the Stevie's Pond swimming beach around to where it joins Great Pond
Right.
is also bad, although not as bad as it was. This year, we only found one needle.
Wow. Peter, thank you for your
thank you.
service. I didn't know you hold dual roles,
Oh, yes. yeah,
harbor
yeah.
master, planning board,
You
but
betcha, with the canoe.
Just a
Thank you for what
quick
you're doing.
comment. We all have different areas of expertise here, and what we do, maybe every other meeting or so, is we will talk about a subject of interest at that time, often based upon the headlines of the paper. Mine is a chemical engineer. I'm an environmental engineer, been involved in water treatment, wastewater treatment. You may recall the better part of a year or so ago, they had the problem with the quality of the water in Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, sure
That
did.
scared us.
Yep.
And so what I did is I actually took a look at the data from that plant, the water, and try to figure out what happened. Basically, they didn't passivate the lines with alkyl phosphates. It probably would have cost them $20,000 or $30,000, and that would have resolved the problem. They didn't do it. They didn't understand.
Reach the lead down
And
the
so what I
pipes.
did is I actually went to the water treatment plant several times to get an idea of what we do. And God, that plant is really well operated and
Yeah, it's
maintained.
very impressive.
Oh,
Yeah.
it is impressive.
Yeah.
And so I just wanted to allay any fears and concern that people in North Andover may have about the quality of our water because of the problems with the quality of drinking water elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, the town made a big investment in that treatment plant. It's great to see.
A painful investment.
thank you, Peter. Thank you. We'll let you know.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me just see where we are. Why don't we do the new business, unless anyone has any comments before we go? Okay.
Any additional discussion about marijuana, recreational,
Well-
or otherwise?
Not really, because, I mean, the only thing I can think of is, it's more of a town issue. If they want to have it, we can give our opinion. And, I mean, we can continue talking about it if you
Yeah.
want. You want
Yeah.
to have a few things you want to say, Kat?
No, I just think that in general, speaking in generalities, recreational marijuana does pose public health risks in terms of accidental exposure, increased use, adolescent use, increased daily use by certain populations. That all has to be looked into, as well as just in general public education on it. So one of the things that I noted in the article was 1 in 3 children under the age of 14 have tried it in Colorado. I think what they have to do is use this data, and what we would do is use this data to come up with campaigns to help combat that. And that's one of the things they did talk about that I feel very strongly about is what resources would we have to kick off some sort of education program in the middle school and even grade school on combating this type of future issue. So I think that's something that we should definitely think about. and
I
look into.
think you're spot on. I mean, we already have the Surgeon General's report on addiction that came out last year in 2016. It talks about the vulnerable ages of addiction between the ages of 12 and 25.
Yeah.
It's just something about the brain development that makes people at that age uniquely susceptible to addiction. And I think that, you know, that the type of addiction that you're talking about with opioids is certainly a very severe addiction that involves
Yeah.
a sickness. But the very simple definition of addiction is the inability to control use.
Right.
And when you're using something on a daily or near daily basis, there's some argument that maybe you're not able to control your use. And I've seen you know, things anywhere from 10 to 15% of people who use marijuana cannabis habitually will meet that definition of addiction. And I think we have to target towards the most vulnerable population. I mean, that's what public health is. It's prevention. So you want to reduce harm by basically targeting your resources to preventing the problem. It's much cheaper to prevent it than it is to treat it once it's established. So I think if anything comes out of that, then that's a place that, you know, however this develops politically, and it is a political question that's going to be settled by voters. But I think, you know, once that's implemented, I think we ought to focus our resources on anything that prevents exposure to that vulnerable population.
So, I mean,
Correct, but the alternate side of that, sort of in terms of not allowing retail, is you think, well, how do we control exposure to, we talk about cigarettes all the time, it is by limiting who can purchase. Now, there's sort of, we have rules about who can access and buy it, but then we don't really have rules about who can use it once it gets home. But by having open and transparent laws and regulations about who can buy, who can walk into a store and get it, that provides us with a way to have some level of control, but also educate. And this, I didn't see this until tonight. This is sort of interesting, but they talk about high use rate and 1 of 3 get exposed, but I wonder if there's a control as part of this. This doesn't strike me as a scientific survey here. If they say, well, in Colorado, this is what the rate is, marijuana is in Colorado, therefore there's a risk of this, we don't know that that's the real risk versus in places where there's not retail marijuana, because there's no doubt that in the United States there's a lot of illicit use of marijuana also. I see it in my office all the time. So there's kind of a flip side to it as well, that how do you factor public health into that? I don't know how we can even really fathom answering that, but.
Well, I think you actually kind of touched on it, which is if you look at where public health has been successful, we should all be pointing to tobacco use has dropped dramatically since the Surgeon General's report in the 1960s. I mean, it's the whole culture has changed, and I think that that's really been a triumph. And if you want to know what the model is and how to deal with it, well, why reinvent it? We already have it. The tobacco control has been very effective.
There's reasonable access for purchase with limitations on who can get it and so on and so forth.
Right, because we've found out from prohibition that prohibition with alcohol doesn't work, and we're finding out that prohibition of cannabis doesn't work either. But that doesn't mean that you can't control access to it. And I think that may be where we ultimately end up, saying that, look, this is going to be out there, it's out there. If we prohibit it totally, we're going to have more illicit and less control. Maybe we'll have better control. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I think we have some information on what works already. And I think tobacco control is a great model that we should look to as we try to apply that to a new situation.
In the way that we went about updating and strengthening the tobacco law in North Andover is to educate ourselves. The board was split at that time.
Right.
And yet, the more we dug into it, the more we realized that this was a problem.
We came to a consensus.
And we
based
came
on
to
the
a consensus,
Yeah.
which I never thought would happen, but it did. I think right now we should really focus on helping Peter. That meeting you say is what, November the 6th? 7th?
Tuesday,
Yeah,
election
this
day.
is just 2 weeks away. Who's going to be there? What information is going to be presented? Because, he's asked from the board, and if more than 2 people at a time to get together, then it's considered to be a meeting. So this is the time.
If we post it correctly, it could be.
But this may be the time to talk about it, because we have to present in 2 weeks to the planning board.
Well, but he didn't pose it with the fact that they're planning to make a decision after our presentation.
Correct. It's just a discussion.
No, they just want
No,
somebody available to be able to
exactly.
ask questions to.
Yeah,
And I think
exactly.
that we, not that we have a consensus right now, but I think we have identified
Yes.
at least a half a dozen things that would be concerns of this board. And we've done so in a public meeting, so it's all part of the public record.
Right.
And so you can, if you stick to those points, I think that you should be able to speak for the board as an individual member.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mind going. I didn't know if anyone else wanted to go. I have no problem. Doesn't matter to me.
Personally, I think that you would be the best because of your position and also your pharmacist. So you know. And what I recommend is that all of us provide you information over the next week or so, and you can put it together and maybe send it back to us or further discuss it with us. But 2 weeks is going to be here real soon, and that's what he wants.
Frank or Tom, your thought?
I mean, I agree.
We can have 2 members go. It doesn't,
We can have definitely 2
there's
members
no
go.
conflict there. So if
I
somebody,
think,
you know,
well, he's checking his schedule. One thing,
have 2 members, I think would be good, because, you know, Peter, I'm glad you came. I really am glad that the planning board reached out, because we're all in this, we all live within the confines of the town.
You have to give a notice, though.
It's good to,
no, only 2? You don't have to-
we get
No,
information from other areas of
3.
town.
We'd have to
We ask
post it.
other facilities in town, and please come, maybe you could talk a little, so, because we're on television, people actually do watch it. So we like to
Larry's wife watches it.
get other, honey, I'll be home later.
My wife won't even watch it.
But
I don't have a wife.
I want to extrapolate more on what Frank said about tobacco. I agree, and I thought about this too after trying to search the net for information, the internet. A lot of people like to smoke it because they get almost immediate absorption when you smoke and inhale, like you would anything. And the edibles are down from what I understand, but looking at it pharmaceutically, you can't eat tobacco. You can chew it, and you do get absorption under the tongue and in the membranes of the mouth. You do get absorption from the nicotine in tobacco or whatever other hundreds of ingredients are in there. The THC portion, tetrahydrocannabinol, it acts like a drug. So when I did a lot of reading on this, like my colleagues did for this meeting. The more you use, the more effect you have. It's like the more you drink, the more out of it you become. And well, there's no difference with this. So when you have, what worries me is the edible portion for children, and I'm sure this is the same concerns. This report we're reading is the future probably of any retail establishment state as to how it's going to progress and then long-term what might happen. So I see this report as like a baseline from the beginning, and then it'll continue to evolve every 2 years. But from everything I understand about reading about THC, and plus, like Joe said, there's a prescription that's a class 2 narcotic, Marinol. It's been around for probably almost 20 years now to help treat ailments that THC would help alleviate, from Crohn's, cancer, lack of eating, whatever it might be. And celiac disease, Frank, is that, what's Crohn's? Crohn's, yeah. So we look at it like tobacco, but then you can only smoke so much and you can only absorb so much nicotine, but this is an actual drug. And I'm worried about kids getting into it like anybody else, and the side effects to this are really remarkable. At first, when marijuana was discussed and it was illegal to buy it and everything else, people were testifying it doesn't affect your memory. It doesn't really get you high. It just makes you a little mellow. Don't know any drug interactions. It's probably okay if a pregnant woman uses it and so forth. But from everything I've read, this is all completely wrong. It has hallucinogenic effects, and this is from their data that they've gotten in Colorado. I found it fascinating. It can cause psychoses, depression, hallucinations, total loss of focus while driving and so forth. So we can make public health any kind of issue we want, but from a public health standpoint, this gets me nervous. Another drug out there that's going to take people's focus and put it elsewhere.
Well, plus the fact that some people, it may be an entree to more potent drugs like opiates.
Yeah.
I read yesterday that 150 people die in the United States daily of opiate overdose. That's scary. Regardless of what the number is, it's very high.
Yeah.
But for the sake of this discussion, I'm going to keep holding this position. This is not really a binary decision.
No.
That's a term like it's not like if the planning board says no retail establishments of marijuana in North Andover, there's not going to be North Andover and marijuana in North Andover. Of course. It's, again, sort of following this model of cigarette. I think part of their question really is, well, sort of looking at the balance of it, maybe it's is it better off to allow it and put it in a controlled manner that we have a model that how it potentially works versus saying, no, we don't want it here, and it's going to stay gray or black market or whatever. That's part of the question I think they need to answer also, because it's happening so many places and it clearly is around.
There are pros and cons of having marijuana sales in North Andover. A pro is that we, as a board, would have control, a measure of control on the sale of marijuana.
What I'm hearing, and this isn't definite, this is just hearsay and no rumors in the public health community, because it's not now considered a pharmaceutical. With the medical marijuana dispensaries, we had no oversight in terms of labeling, packaging, edible production, anything like that. With it going to a retail setting, we may have the ability to issue regulations, such as our tobacco regulations, to incorporate signage, ID policy, things like that we do with tobacco. Violations for selling to minors. The same thing we do with tobacco could be in place for a recreational marijuana store, as well as a food permit for the production of edibles. One of the things that obviously is a big concern for public health is accidental overdoses from infants and toddlers eating gummy bears or, candies, lollipops, whatever it is. Having some regulation over maybe the packaging on that in a local Board of Health regulation to help oversee. One of the things that they did note in the summary was childproof packaging does actually help to a point, but it's something small step that can be implemented through a local regulation. So I'm hearing that because it's going to be recreational, food and tobacco type regulations could apply, and you could have oversight and jurisdiction over.
Right. It really comes down to, if you regulate something too much to the point where you keep it from actually coming to the light of day, you just drive it underground and then you don't have anything. That's the same argument with the tax. If you tax it at 10%, people will probably prefer to buy it from a registered dispensary. If you tax it at 90%, it's just going to go underground. It's going to go underground. And so you don't get your tax revenue if that's what you're after. And then the second thing is you don't get your regulatory side of it as well. We all know that there's illegal cigarettes. That's what they tackled that guy in New York for selling singles. It happens when the taxes get really high. I think that there's going to be a balance somewhere. The world isn't perfect, and we're going to have to figure it out.
Well, it's if the town wants it. The town's probably going to vote on it. So it's if they want it in town. If they don't.
It depends who votes.
Right. That's true. But this is, from what I understand from the legislation that passed, that the towns, they reserve the right to give the towns the power to not allow retail establishments in that town if it's voted upon.
Correct.
So if the town wants it in, then we have to
Then we take that next step.
take the next step, of course. Yeah.
Whether or not...
North Andover voted no on marijuana or yes?
No,
No.
no. Whether or not it's sold in North Andover, people are going to buy it, period. Anyone who wants it will get it.
Yep.
Just go across the border to some other town, assuming they sell it. If not, go to the town after that town.
It's like anything else. Why would you want it in town, number one?
New Hampshire's
Towns
considering
want
it.
tax revenue. So anything can open up as long as the tax dollars come in. Look over there and, the tax dollars came in. So towns want tax revenue on something like this. Now, it's legal. Towns get tax revenue from the cigarettes. So it's hard to make an argument. In that case, it is a legal entity now. But there is a public health issue, and I think you're right as far as, we don't have rules yet, but what's the effect of more exposure in town versus what's there now? Maybe that's it. more availability.
But if you take a look at these adverse effects of people, particularly people that smoke a lot of marijuana, I just found it to be eye-opening when I looked at it today. And then I say to myself, well, maybe the federal government is right. Maybe it just should be illegal, except for medical. That's a different story.
Well, that's personal opinion. When I went to pharmacy school, we used to grow it. It was in our botany lab and our biology lab too. They had a whole facility there.
What'd you do with it?
Not going to tell anybody where, but no, they used to grow it for research.
Huh?
So we used to examine the leaves and everything else. It wasn't any big deal. And no, we didn't use it.
I didn't ask. I wasn't assuming that, was I?
If we have a lull, I'd like to put forth a motion. I'd like to move that we waive the reading of the board reports in the interest of time.
Second?
All those.
They
I
don't
don't
have to
mind.
be read, we've
No.
provided them with, we can review them.
Yeah,
Yes.
you're going to email them to everybody, right?
Yes.
Last month's too?
Yep.
So we all have it?
I didn't get a chance.
Okay, no,
tonight,
that's
but
okay.
we'll do.
Yeah, that's fine. Let me just see.
Because Caroline didn't give me yours.
Meeting, board reports, okay.
Just kidding.
Fine.
Motion's been
All those-
seconded.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, fine. We'll waive that. The only thing left then would be the meeting date change for November.
Yes, we're gonna, just an announcement, change it to November 20th.
Yeah.
Because of conflicts on the week before. I believe
Is
the
this a
email.
second change? Didn't we move it up before, or?
No, this is the change that we emailed about a couple weeks ago.
Oh, till Monday, okay.
Yeah.
So it's going to move to Monday,
Yep.
and it's off on the 16th.
Correct.
Correct.
All right. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and delete these.
Do you want to think about it, or do you want to discuss who's going to the planning board meeting, or do you want to mull it around and get back to Brian? And
I think I can be available, and you've already said you're available.
Yeah.
So I think it'll just be the two of us.
Okay.
Meanwhile, if I come up with anything, I'll just...
Yeah, I'd appreciate any
Yeah,
information. I
I'll
really
forward
would.
you. If any of us comes.
And we'll work on it between now and then too, to get
Yeah.
some
Yeah,
some
good.
discussion points
Thank
coming.
I mean, just
Yeah.
FYI, I have a email in, I forwarded it, I copied Brian on it
Yes.
too, to
Yep.
Cheryl Sabara from Mass Association of Health Boards,
Mhm.
with a whole variety of questions that
Yeah.
would pertain to tonight and any future questions about
Yeah.
what other boards. And I don't know, she's extremely busy, and I don't know
I know,
when
she
she'll
is.
get back.
She's also good, too.
Yeah. So Peter, at the meeting, if we can, we'll have information, Frank and I, on how other boards of health in various towns across the state and cities are viewing it and what they're looking at. So I don't have that information yet, but I did put that out there to an association for the boards of health, the attorney that runs it. So I just don't have the information yet. Hopefully, she'll get back to me within the time frame.
All right.
Any updates? You want to discuss anything?
No, I'm just, we had the big family flu clinic last week, which seemed to be very successful. We finished all our senior flu clinics. We went out to each senior housing, fire department, police department, all the schools. We're vaccinating at the schools for the staff. So we have one more school to go, and we have a little over 100 vaccines left, and then 130 for state supplied, so far good.
Yeah.
Great.
And cholesterol screenings, we got the final approval to move forward with that through the state, so I've been in touch with Irene to get that up and running next month,
How much
November.
money do you get annually, roughly, from the Council on Aging?
From what?
The Council on Aging, what they buy for you, for example?
That I
What they-
don't know. I know that they were generous with the help of the cholesterol supplies to get that up and running, but that I don't know. I mean, I started in May, so I don't have an idea.
The reason that I asked is the road race, the annual road race, I don't think we're going to have it anymore going forward.
Okay.
And that was a huge source of revenue for the Council on Aging. I think it was like $30,000 a year.
Oh.
So that's going to be gone. As a matter of fact, amongst other things, what the Council on Aging does, and I'm a recent member, is it pays for the annual fireworks display. That's about $5,000-6,000. So with this additional loss of revenue, I don't know going forward.
Thank you for a successful flu clinic. I was there. I know you snapped pictures, Brian. I know you did. I saw you. And it didn't hurt. It didn't hurt. No, I was not in pain. I was trying to think of something else. But listen, real quick, I'm not even going to, real quick, and this is just an update from the CDC on influenza vaccine. I'm not going to read it. I'm just going to say 151 to 166 million doses are out there now for the 2017-2018 season, with most of those, 119 million doses being quadrivalent vaccines. I thought that was interesting. Optimally, vaccination should occur before the onset of influenza activity in the community, meaning don't wait until January to say, gee, I think I need a flu shot. Now's the time. Now is definitely the time to do it. I'm going to skip a lot of this because just for time. Skip. Okay. This is interesting. They're doing it now, but they're expanding on it. They were using eggs to grow the culture for the vaccines, to grow the vaccines in there. But what they're getting away from that, and hopefully as of next year, they're going to use the virus component will be, they call cell-derived for the first time. This represents the first step towards producing a totally egg-independent, inactivated virus vaccine. And they're using recombinant technology, so DNA technology, in the production. I found that interesting. So people with egg allergies, hopefully.
There are some vaccines out there that are
Right.
Yeah.
And they're doing more.
I think the problem with that in the past is that process, that recombinant DNA process, is
Yeah.
a slower process than the egg development. It takes more time. And I think that had been pushed a couple years ago, but what was it? There was sort of a last-minute change in the strains or whatever, but...
Yeah. All I read was, this is from the CDC, they're going to use animal-derived cells for that. The use of egg-independent vaccine technology is likely to provide vaccines that more precisely represent the antigenetic characteristics of circulating viruses and have the potential to offer improved protection. Brand new, right off the press. So I just wanted to mention that. This is the time to mention it. I'm not mentioning it next month. Anybody have anything else? Do I hear a motion?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All those in favor to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Aye.